Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to MusicWise. It's been a little while since I've hosted this show, and I thought it's a new year. It's a time of further reflection and action. And over the course of the holiday season, I was inspired, as I always have been in the past, by a longtime friend now and colleague, by an article that was that appeared in the New York Times in conjunction, of course, with so many of the things that we were celebrating about Beethoven, written by the composer Gabriela Lena Frank. And I thought to myself, if I'm going to continue MusicWise into the future, there's no better person I'd like to have a conversation with right now than her. So help me welcome Gabby to MusicWise. Hi.
Hello, Donato.
You know, we've had the opportunity to work together in the past, and I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we first sort of encountered one another in person during a rehearsal process and performance of your piece, 3 Latin American Dances, with the San Francisco Symphony Youth Orchestra. And as you, being a Bay Area person, are so aware that one of the many wonderful jewels of the Bay Area is the San Francisco Symphony Youth Orchestra. And while I was the music director for years, looking back, having the chance to explore music such as your piece and all the other pieces that they perform in such an in-depth way, and often with the composer, I was struck by your acceptance and reaction to their ability, but still knowing exactly what to say and in a way to inspire them to even be better than they are. And I've always been so inspired by your acknowledgement of your surroundings and how you're dealing with it, and your honesty about that. And that struck me in the article about what you wrote about Beethoven, and about how your perception of how his deafness informed his compositional process, not through just one piece, but through his entire life. And I thought that was we might as well begin with that. There's so many other topics, but this sort of informs, and I'd like for folks to be able to understand what you're about through that article. How did that come about, and why did you want to talk about that particular aspect of Beethoven?
Well, thank you for having me here, Donato. It's good to see you. I think you're in your kitchen, the way I'm in my kitchen also. And you know, I think even the fact that we're in each other's kitchen, and there's something beautiful and kind of intimate about that as off stage, I think is the underlying theme for my relationship to music. And the music industry is a big part of it, and music academia is a big part of that. But if one can see music academia and the music industry as a middleman between us musicians and the larger world, it's it's a powerful middleman, but it's not the only route to how we might feel about a composer, or how we might view why we work so hard. Are we trying to work hard to do well in the music industry and music academia? Or are we trying to work hard to be an art citizen in the larger world, and grapple with the industry and academia as two powerful middlemen, but not the exclusive ones? And I had that view from the very beginning about Beethoven, you know, and I think it stems from the fact that I am partially deaf myself, and have witnessed huge cultural changes within the hearing impaired or hard of hearing or deaf world, or partially deaf world, even in terms of how they label themselves and what monikers are being used, much as people have done that with race. Like, do we define ourselves, I'm Latina as well, as Hispanic or Latina or Latinx? I mean, so these kinds of decisions have to be made from a personal place. Now, that article, the first time that I began writing it, I was maybe 20 years old. I was a sophomore, I was a junior as an undergrad at Rice University. and I had to write a paper on Beethoven. And I was one of those students that never did well writing papers if the topic was given to me. But I just couldn't do something that I mean, I could do something passable, and get a good grade. But for it to be inspired, you had to be the type of teacher that would give me free reign. So when this wonderful musicologist who recently retired, Marcia Citron, who was an early pioneer in looking at women composers and their contribution to the classical music field, when she allowed me to pick my topic, I said, I have a theory. I have a theory about Beethoven and his deafness. And I was 20 years old. And I said, I think his deafness did something to his music. And it was as simple. And I pointed out just 2 or 3 little observations I made just about the piano music, the sonatas that were so dear to me. And I knew all of them. I was playing a lot. And this is back in the day when I was playing a lot as a pianist. And there was just things in there that just made sense to me that I wouldn't be able to articulate very well to an audiologist. And I was very familiar with the experience of working with audiologists and speech therapists and hearing aid technicians and ear, nose, and throat doctors. And I was beginning to get indoctrinated into the culture of classical music and music history. Like, what are the traditional views of looking at Beethoven? And I was a little bit in disagreement with everybody about what the hearing experience was supposed to be like, and just based off of my own personal experience. So this was a very scary thing for me to do. And yet I felt safe with Marcia. She's always been so unconventional. So I wrote that paper, and it was like a 3-4 page paper, an undergrad music history paper. I'm sure it was clumsy. I'm sure I still have it somewhere. It's probably in my parents' attic. This was back when we were actually turning in papers printed, from typewriters, and she gave me a great grade. And she saw the spirit of it. And she said something like, I'd never thought of this before. And this is something I hope you keep working on and thinking about. And I felt like I had just got benedicted by the Pope. It was one of those kind of experiences where somebody you respect so much endorses a view or something in you. And I've always been that way. If a teacher of mine, somebody I really respected, was in my corner, I felt like I could do anything. It's that really positive relationship between a master and apprentice that can exist. So that was the first time. The second time, as a doctoral student, I'm more learned now. I'm more mature, and I feel my weight about to enter the professional world. I took a Beethoven course by a wonderful Beethoven scholar at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, Stephen, was still teaching, and he always had this just wonderful manner about him. He was such an orator. Really, it just made you fall in love with his love of Beethoven's music. And again, he let us choose the papers that we wanted to write. So I wrote one paper on the scant mandolin music that Beethoven wrote, because as a composer, I'm very interested in the atypical pieces that a composer might write, knowing how those types of things fascinated me. So again, I was looking at Beethoven in a more atypical light. So on his mandolin pieces, and I came up with this far-fetched theory about how he heard Don Giovanni and he was in town at the same time as Mozart. I can't remember exactly what it was, and heard the mandolin music in the opera, and it inspired him, and he's using the same keys and suspiciously close thematic material. I was like a real detective. Then the second paper I wrote was more on his deafness. And I had some time to think about it. I was a little bit more audacious. And then I almost did a dissertation on Beethoven and his deafness.
Oh, really?
And I almost picked up a double degree, not just as a composer, but as also a theorist. But I jumped ship after I did my theory orals. There were a bunch of us that were doing the hybrid program that jumped ship. And by this point, I was beginning to travel in Latin America. I was really taking a creative detour, away from an academic rigor. And at heart, I'm not that type of theorist anyway. And I clashed a bit with the person that was going to be my theory advisor. She had a certain view on how she wanted me to write about Beethoven and his deafness. And I wanted to take a more personal view. And there are these dissertations coming on music history, music theory by grad students that are kind of a more holistic treatise. It's analytical, but it's hard to say whether they're theory treatises or history treatises. is. And I think this is really important because there is wiggle room for a curious artist to write about something if we can blur the boundaries a bit. And I think I just wasn't at the right time for the department. So with no hard feelings or anything like that, but I jumped ship and I never picked up that topic again. But over the years, it's a constant in my life. I mean, I'm partially deaf, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So the way the article, how do I get from that to this article in the New York Times? I did not plan it at all. Corina da Fonseca, the wonderful New York Times critic and thinker, she's not just a critic, she writes about culture as well, as a wonderful weekly newsletter that I like receiving. She had interviewed me for something else. And I was the recipient of the Heinz Award. And so that article came out about my life in general, my academy that I have, living in a small town of 1,000 people as opposed to the Bay Area where I'm native. And she said, I'm also exploring this topic of deafness and hearing loss within the music community. And over these decades, I've met many musicians with hearing losses and who will come to me quietly for advice. It's something that's hard for us to talk about. It's really rampant in our industry, but it's one of the worst things that can happen to us in our self-esteem, some of it through occupational hazards, some through aging. The guinea pig for a while for a hearing aid being developed specifically for musicians and have been able to weather this career in spite of my hearing loss. So Donato, when you and I were rehearsing some of my work, I could hear everything you were doing musically from where I sit in the audience during the rehearsals. But you might remember I always had somebody sitting next to me. So when you were saying, Gabby, do you want this? Do you want that? I lose that. And so I would ask the person next to me to quickly repeat what you were saying so that we would be in this triangle. I've learned these survival mechanisms. Sometimes they terrified me in the beginning, but over the years, they kept working. So I became more confident, even with the disability. And I was talking to Corina just about my personal experiences, and I just wrote a long email. That's all I did. I wrote a long email to her, and I said, here's my experiences. Go on with your bad self. You're a remarkable writer and researcher, and you're going to do something amazing about this. A couple weeks later, a week later, yeah, and I even remember I couldn't get my thoughts to her right away. I had to delay. I was so busy with other things. So Zachary Wolf, who's the editor of this section, of the art section, reached out and said, we want to give you a byline. We just basically just want to take what you wrote and just publish it. I was like, what? So I went back and said, did I say anything stupid? I wasn't planning to get out to the world at all. We made some minor edits for clarity, because remember, it was just an email.
Right.
And published what I had, my exchange with Corina. And there it was. It was like from the time that I knew that they were going to publish it to when they did was about 36 hours.
Unbelievable. That's a wonderful story. And of course, the best way for something like that to happen, because if you had known perhaps too far in advance, like, I'm going to write an article for the New York Times, it wouldn't have maybe, a couple of things sprung up in that lovely story. Number one was, to me at least, was that you've been given by various folks who in your life a place to have a safe space. You described that from your musicology teacher during your undergrad, giving you that confidence and that space to be to be able to write something that you maybe haven't formulated yet into something, a grand thesis. And it seems to me that, and this goes back to something we were talking about before we went online, was that we're both, in a way, products of maybe being in the right place at the right time, having luck be a big part of it, being given the gifts of those things that perhaps shouldn't have been, should, for new folks, not, they should be there. That should be the process that should be inculcated into the experience of the young artist. And I so appreciate what you've decided to pay that forward in your academy and in your music. Just that sense of belonging. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm a complicated mix of advantage and disadvantage. I grew up and there wasn't a lot of money in my household, but we had enough to be safe. And my father started a family as a grad student. My mom was a teenager when she came, marrying my father here. And I remember her making clothes to put food on a table to make money. And as a private seamstress, she had skills. Um, and my brother and I were scholastically high achievers growing up, but we were consistently the only Latinos in our honors courses. So we had the advantage of parents that stress education. But I was overlooked for all kinds of things that I knew in my heart I deserved also, and I just didn't feel like I could say anything about it. So I think this is very typical of Gen X people, that came of age during affirmative action, when affirmative action was done quite clumsily. It wasn't done with support for getting a person to stay in the university once they got a spot. Didn't respect that kind of potential. My first day at Rice, I was practicing in the practice room, and I was just marveling that I was there. I was so amazed. I felt very behind because it was a late decision when I realized that music was even an option. I thought I was going to study Russian. That's what I was studying in high school, and this was the time of Gorbachev and Perestroika, the late 80s, and so that was my political awakening. But I remember making that last minute change, practicing in the beautiful, gorgeous room at the Shepherd School of Music. And a member of the piano faculty suddenly burst into my room and started yelling at me. And he was saying, get away from that instrument, step back, get back to work. What are you doing? And I realized suddenly that he thought I was one of the cleaning help that were all Mexican women. And he had mistaken me for one of them. And that was in contrast to somebody like Marcia Citron a couple years later. And so I had all of these invitations issued to me, but then also a lot of messages saying that I didn't belong there. And I was strategic. I managed to keep my head down for most of it. I wasn't surrounded by other peers going through the same thing, and managed to find peers that played music with me and supported me, are the mentors that I bring to my academy now 30 years later. So it was a dramatic experience that I had in school, of extreme highs, and some dark lows as well, where I knew a space wasn't for me and I just sidestepped it. Another example of that is I really did almost no competitions. All the competition that composers were submitting their scores for, and I didn't even bother applying to the big places like Aspen or Tanglewood. I just thought they wouldn't be open to somebody like me in the early 90s. And this was, remember, a generation ago. Things were different. But I managed to make it work other ways and find champions in other ways. And these champions really were champion. They were campeón. They really, they believed in me and they went to bat for me, and tremendously hard. So yeah, I feel like luck comes into most people's lives, but it may not be recognizable, and it comes up like in an instant. It's like a few seconds, and you don't know. And then sometimes you're just dumb. You don't see that something is genuine and something is a really good opportunity, and other things you think are really good. You participate in, and then you realize that it sets you back in some way, whether professionally or even just emotionally as an artist. It made you fearful to pursue a certain path that was actually your destiny, was to write a certain type of music, but you delay it. I mean, so I'm a complicated mix. I don't think it should be so complicated. I think it should be much more linear and much more direct. And the point of my assisting perhaps my younger siblings that are coming up is I deeply believe they're supposed to go farther than me. They're supposed to get more done. They're supposed to write better music, braver music, more earth-changing music than I can. And they will, if people like me, walk alongside them as long as we can, and they get to live more years into the future and push us to a better future. And I've had people do that for me. And it's an honor to be part of that kind of continuum.
I'm struck by, I think that we're of similar age, of similar vintage, and I sense that exactly what you're saying is that while there is something to be said about overcoming hurdles, that makes you the adage of it makes you stronger, or it makes you a warrior, etc., etc. There, I think the music industry, arts in general, are hard enough as it is in finding one's voice and finding one's path without the added hurdles of what you've experienced or what can be experienced by so many. And what I think, again, going back to our conversation before we started, is that there are glimmers of hope now. It does seem like there is a much more serious commitment to pieces of music by people of color, to a diversity, to equity in our little corner of the universe that has, by and large, been incredibly conservative and scared of its existence in today's world. And this embracing has been so wonderful to witness. We're seeing it in real time, whereas before we only sensed, perhaps, that it might happen at some point. Yeah?
I totally agree with you. I have never seen this consistent of an effort, and I'm hopeful that it's here to stay. I've seen waves of interest, but I've also seen personal experience and dispiriting experiences where I felt that my success came at the expense of other people's, who might be women or people of color. For instance, that once they've played a Gabriela Lena Frank piece, they could check off that box and then just relax for 3 seasons. Now we can just do what we normally do. We just, got absolution for 3 seasons, and then we have to do another one. And next time won't be me, it'll be some other composer that's diverse. And it's not like I was being played a lot anyway, because I would just come up on somebody's radar when they needed to check off the box. But every time I did, I tried to kill it. I tried to really be myself. I really tried to tell a story. I really tried to write something that was skillfully orchestrated or really bold in what the string quartet needed to do. And I went through experiences where, because people only think about check the box, they had already automatically given me very little rehearsal time, and whether it was a quartet or an orchestra. And that would, as I've said before to some of my peers and colleagues, I could have written a piece that was just whole notes, and they were going to give me a standing ovation, no matter what. And I had to not think about that, because it was going to just slow me down. I had to think about writing for the world again, and I was also really struck that people that I think are very progressive and very hip in their views and worldly would lose all that wonderfulness once they got to their job in classical music. Suddenly they were okay with just doing dead white guys, with not having any women in the repertoire. But as soon as they left, they were the type of people that I would like to talk with, that I think are really, progressive. And so what is it about this world that we toe the line in a certain way and don't even realize it? And then to our chagrin, realize, wait a second, I always thought of myself as an inclusive, open-minded person. But that's not how I spend the bulk of my hours. So I think this has been a sobering time for a lot of us. And then for people to even understand what anti-racism means, it takes a while, to really get it, how these things thrive if you simply just do your good thing in your lane. You have to actively participate in keeping the fire down. That's an uncomfortable position for many. And I'm going to say people of color as well, not just white people. So I think if I could say moving forward, I would feel like this wasn't just another trend, another wave of interest that's a little bigger than what I've seen before, only to retreat. If I felt like students going into the classical music conservatory who love European culture, you love the music of European culture, you love Beethoven, Bach, felt like they were being loved back, that it was a reciprocal relationship. And when I was in school, there were no Latin American music courses for me to take. I had to do that all on my own, and nobody goes to Peru for classical music. Everybody goes to Austria or Paris or Vienna. I mean, I was so swimming upstream that I kept a lot of that quiet because I thought I wouldn't be taken seriously. The fact that I
Well,
was
there's
volunteering.
also, I mean, sorry to interrupt, but there's also this sense of self-discovery because it's not taught in the schools at all. You know, I didn't learn about the centuries worth of Mexican classical music until I was a resident conductor of the San Francisco Symphony, and I started
Yeah.
conducting these Dia de los Muertos concerts. And I, on my own research, I think, why aren't? I mean, there's so much music that I mean, we're just talking about one country, not let alone a continent of music below that. You're absolutely right. And music that could ease, we're not talking about music that might seem difficult to understand or intellectually challenged. I mean, just great, wonderful classical music from all the centuries, totally being ignored.
Yeah, and we're depriving ourselves. It's like we're depriving ourselves of these gifts. Why make your life less interesting? Don't you want to know how much more good music there is out there? What is imperiled exactly? What is imperiled exactly? So then we have to think about that. Why are people digging in their heels? Now, there are different cultures within the music industry. So because of the way we rehearse orchestras, it can be it's hard to learn new skills. You have to put on so many shows. The repertoire is so difficult and exposed that there is in general a resistance to new music, which I think is too bad because I think new music is where it's at, and that you will get many more people into the audience hall if you do this incredible diet of the past and in the present and the future. But there are people that have worked so hard to get where they are that they don't want to then have to double their workload, you know, and learn repertoire from another country, and they're going to, perhaps their authority is challenged because they've spent all their time honing their Beethoven skills and their ability to realize Beethoven. How do you realize a music inspired by Sampones Peruanas? You know, it's like, what language is that even? Well, you know, you have to not be afraid of discovery in order to enjoy something like that. And
Well,
I think
you bring up a great point in that the standard conservatory training of our gifted colleagues, past, present, and even now, really does focus solely on mastering the classics. And even the audition, you look at the audition process for most orchestras, you know, how does a violinist sit in front of Mendelssohn's Scherzo from Midsummer Night's Dream and look at it afresh? I mean, it's been taught to them as an excerpt ad nauseum for years, and it's not taking anything away from that masterpiece itself. But when you play as you mentioned, when you play this standard repertoire over and over and over again, and program such little music, even in the conservatory world, you're training artists to be conservative by nature, to not seek something new. And I've often, I'll put this out here, that I've often encountered incredible resistance by our colleagues on stage for doing new things because it's just not in their repertoire. by and large. I'm not making a blanket statement. There are exceptions, of course, but we're talking about these communities within communities of music making.
And there's a strong culture of shame. Shame you played the wrong note. Shame you don't have that memorized. Shame you're out of tune, you know. And so if you worked really hard to get it all cleaned up, you want that payoff. And so I totally agree with you that if we can foster a more an environment that continues to show reverence for the past, but shows more reverence for the future. I think we need to show more reverence for the future than for the past without dissing anything from the past. Then I think you're going to have an attitude less of perfection and more of exploration. And perfection will be the byproduct, will be the natural byproduct of exploration. And we'll be training musicians for the 21st century instead of training them for the 1800s like we have been for so long. When I go into the conservatory, I've said this so many times, I go into the conservatory these days, not this past year, the pandemic, but you know, in previous years leading up to the pandemic, and I'm guesting as a composer. And I feel like I'm 20 years old again, 25 years old again. I feel like it's the 90s. The music is the same. The festival papers on the bulletin board's the same. The repertoire I'm seeing on the orchestra, you know, what's being rehearsed, it's the same. It's the same. And the composer wing is over here, and the singer wing is over here, and the percussions are in the back. I mean, everything is like the same. There's a little bit of change in the demographics. I see some marginal changes. I see more people of color walking down the hallways, you know, but it's like I've stepped into a time machine.
Mm-hmm.
And the world has changed so much from the time that you and I were in school that it's it makes me really want to say things to the young performers, saying this is about 5% of what you need to know. This is about 5% of what you need to know. And I would be playing other composers' music right now. I'd be reading. I'd be trying to travel when you can. I'd be going to film showings with the film department. I'd be opening up your mind as much as possible, volunteering. I know you're tired. You have a lot to do. Somehow you have to get your straight A's and do all of this other stuff. And because I feel like this training is not enough. And it's actually going to harden your curiosity. It's going to, if you submit fully to it. So it's incumbent upon them to get the good. There's so much good that can be gotten. And so that was my way of operating. There was so much good that I got out of it. And I really had a very positive experience in spite of the many challenges. But I shouldn't have had to be so ingenious. In spite of myself, I managed to be very ingenious. I got money from the women's studies, the romance language studies department, interdisciplinary think tank at Michigan to send me to Latin America. I got one grant from the music school, and the rest I self-funded. And that I just did copy work and did everything else to make happen. And I had the luck of not having huge loans. I had some loans and was able to pay them off, so I didn't have a financial chokehold to deal with. But we should institutionally be enabling our creative artists. And when you do, they're naturally going to become art citizens as a world. Because remember, they're going to look at the industry and academia as two powerful middlemen, but not the exclusive arenas in which to apply their gifts. And that's mostly how it works now.
Would you say that what we're talking about right now is the impetus behind the creation of your academy?
Well, there's the immediate impetus, and then there's the long-range impetus that became clear to me in the 4 years since I started the academy. But first of all, we're babies. This is a very young institution. We're about as old as an undergraduate career. And I was not planning ever to start a nonprofit. Nobody ever heard me talking about it. And suddenly, boom, I just did it. And it shocked my parents because it just came out of nowhere, it looked like to everybody. And for the first year, for the first 9 months at least, we didn't even have a website. And I did that deliberately because I didn't know if I was going to continue with it. It was an all big experiment. So what happened was during the presidential election in 2016, and this is when Donald Trump first came onto our radar, and Hillary Clinton was running. It seems like a lifetime ago that we were in that era. And my husband and I had left the Bay Area. We're in this beautiful part of Mendocino County, about 2 hours north of San Francisco. It feels farther away. It's only 2 hours, but it's just a different landscape. We were in this house for maybe less than a year. And I was taking a cross-country trip with my husband and our dogs from California to a gig in New Mexico during the election, and we drove through MAGA land. And what I saw convinced me, oh my God, I think this election's going to go a certain way, a way that I'm not going to like. And I got out of the bubble of the kind of progressive environment that I was accustomed to living in. And at a truck stop, I've started talking about this story more recently since last year. I hadn't talked about it very much. I got accosted by this. I'm sure he was a racist. He was this big, tall, white guy, and I was picking up candy and some drinks, and suddenly I was knocked down from behind, and I fell, and I dropped everything, and it was this huge, like, body blow. I thought something like furniture had fallen on me or something like that. And I looked up, and this guy was standing over me, and he was scary looking, and he was smiling and laughing, and he opened his shirt to make sure that I saw that he was carrying. He had a gun on him somehow, and this was in an open carry state. I have never experienced anything like that before.
Mm-hmm.
Microaggressions, insults. I used to call them insults, not microaggressions, before the youngins educated me about that. And but something like this, no. I managed to get up, and he laughed, and I had that reaction, like, don't cry, don't let him see that you're so afraid. And I went up to the cashier to pay for it. And it was another big, scary white dude. But his reaction, he had watched and seen the whole thing. He leaned in, and he just said very quietly, he asked me if I was okay. And I careened, from fear to like this immense gratitude that hopefully, nothing would have happened, but I didn't know. And I went outside. My husband, Jeremy, he had seen this guy go inside, and he was with the dogs in the desert heat. He couldn't leave the dogs, and he was, really afraid of something wasn't right. And a woman that we think was his wife or girlfriend who looked miserable. I think she might have been a battered wife. She looked miserable, was sitting in the truck waiting for him. And we drove off, and I was shaken to my core. And all I could think was, I think things are changing. I think things are changing in my country. I'm a patriot. I love the United States of America. I think we have a lot that we need to live up to, from our original sin of indigenous genocide and slavery. But this is an incredible country to live in. And so I said, I have to do something. And I started imagining creating a safe space over about that week. And I got home a week later after the gig, and I started cold calling composers that I had met, emerging composers from the last 2 or 3 years of guesting at festivals and schools and all kinds of programs. All of them said yes. And we paid for the whole thing. So my career is doing well enough with orchestra commissions. Probably took 3 orchestra commissions. And my husband and I flew over twice, 19 composers over that year, and 12 faculty. And we paid for the whole thing, including artist fees. And we just did it. And so that was the immediate impetus of why I did it. The long range impetus was I realized I was putting in everything into, because literally my house, we do it in my house. I said, if we're going to do it in my house, I'm going to do it my way. All the things that I think composers and performers need. And we're small and tiny and nimble. So what would I really have wanted? And that was the long range impetus, was getting in there some activities, somebody to say things that I would have been drinking in when I was younger, to hear somebody say. And things like, there are no dumb questions. You get to write bad music here in a pursuit of exploration. I'm going to put you in groups that are really scary. You've never written for brasses. You've never written for strings. Guess what? You're going in that group because this is your opportunity. Nobody's going to judge. And if you're here, you're good. You're good. Just don't worry about like trying to posture or being afraid. This is not like a comp seminar, a bad one that you might have been part of. This is going to be everything good that we know can happen. We eat good food. We have a lot of different classes on topics. Composers get their works read. Performers feel heard because they can share everything they feel like that every composer needs to know. And then it grew from there. We have a very active alum association now, and we get professional commissions for them once they come through the program. With the pandemic, but I was doing it before the pandemic. I started developing an online component to deepen the 1-year experience that composers have so that we could do. I didn't even know what Zoom was when we were starting to think about what this could look like. And then a pandemic just brought us all.
Did any of us know what Zoom was before?
No, I thought it was a portable recorder. So it's still confusing for me when people talk about recorded on Zoom, like what, the platform or this thing. I did that as a climate initiative because the first year of the Academy was 2017. And Donato, you'll remember that was the first year that we really got slammed in California. I knew somebody that lost their home, and oh my goodness. And then 2018 was Paradise, was even worse. 2019, the evacuation reached the coastline. It's just been 2020 was worse than any other year with the dry lightning strikes. I mean, each year we keep breaking records of how bad it's gotten. And the hard reality is that most of us who are successful, I'm going to say 99% of us who are successful in our field, we did it through very unfriendly climate, actions, mostly flying. I think it's mostly flying. And that has to change.
Yes.
So most people shut down. And you think about this, they say, no, let's just stay with it. Don't be afraid. Let's think through this. And then the pandemic came along that actually gave people a strong bite of reality. This is the first ecological disaster because that's what it is. A pandemic is a sign of environmental distress. It's the first ecological disaster that's happening planet-wide at the same time instead of just being regionalized as California's crazy fires or those crazy people that build on flood zones or, fill in the blank. Everything's been regionalized before. So we musicians have a role to play. And as I'm moving into the second half of my life, as I say, I'm going to hit 100. I'm determined to make it to 100 because I want to know what it looks like when we are green. I think by the time I'm 100 years old, we're going to be a green planet. I'm optimistic. And I need to know and we will hit that if people like us are part of the solution and reimagining what this planet can look like now, specifically for us musicians. It might be a little easier in some ways for composers because we're mainly writers. And if we can send out our chocolates, like Willy Wonka's chocolate factory, when it was mysterious in the beginning and they just sent out candy, but nobody ever saw what was happening inside, we could just send out our chocolates, into the mundo, right? Then for performers, there are going to be a number of different types of changes that are needed. Do we really need to fly in somebody exotic from Europe to play that violin concerto? What about your own concertmaster? Or what about local musicians? I mean, we have so many heroes that would hop a train or drive a day if we gave them money and a nice hotel stay. We need to get rid of these restriction clauses that if you do a concert in a certain area, you can't pick up another concert. You can't pick up another concert all year. No, if somebody is going to get on a plane and they only take three trips a year, 2 trips a year, they've got to make money. They've got to explore the Northwest or explore the Southwest and then maybe take a train back and do a tour. I mean, but presenters need to band together to figure out how to do these kinds of things. And I think musicians would enjoy being art citizens once we get over our fear, our fear of doing non-Western repertoire. If we could breed the next generation to think about being local heroes with some gallivanting abroad, and then using digital, the digital reach that we've begun to explore with our backs against the wall, but we were exploring it this past year, the pandemic. There were some exciting things, some big silver linings that came out of this. Now, I have a question for you, Donato.
Mm-hmm.
that was trying to meet with the orchestral world, with many of our great orchestras going online. And so we have top 5 orchestra, fill in a blank, playing Beethoven. And then we have another top 5 orchestra on the other coast playing Beethoven. And then another top 5 orchestra somewhere in the middle playing Beethoven. They're now in competition with one another. Just like Hulu and Amazon, Netflix, they can't all do Law and Order. They can't all do, the main show of the day. They have to change the content.
That's
they
absolutely
can be similar. They could be another detective show, whatnot, but they have to change up the content because the difference between these top 5 orchestras, I don't think, really comes through that well in the digital format. They sound very similar. It's hard to really be as distinct. And you're in competition with the universe now. They're gonna have to change their content, and I feel like this is a good time to put composers to work. Like if you want a premiere by Marco Balter or Jimmy Lopez or Angelica Negron or any of these wonderful voices that are around us, you can only go to Philadelphia Orchestra. And
but I think you've touched upon, and it's something, of course, that I haven't written about yet, and I haven't talked about it in depth, but I've been thinking about, and I hope our colleagues and our arts administrator friends are talking about this not only amongst their staff but with one another, is what you talked about specifically, which is about the guest artists, guest conductors, and not to take away from these incredible folks who travel the world. We deserve to hear their talent. They deserve to travel the world, but it's been so willy-nilly. They come to Los Angeles for a week, fly back to Paris for a week, then go to San Francisco for a week, then go back to New York. As you said, it's truly irresponsible. If you take a close look, we contribute a lot to the not being green. And I think that it will take some collaboration, and it at first may seem tricky, but it's really in the end scheduling. And I think, as you said, why not celebrate our local heroes within the orchestra and the folks that live within a train ride? It's one of the reasons I felt like so many of our orchestras went silent, which of course had to do with health and safety, but it also had to do with the fact that they couldn't operate without having these transcontinental flights happening every week. They just couldn't do it.
And what I've found was really, I was really enjoying these concerts because the concerts were unexpected. They were doing things like mixing a large ensemble piece with a string quartet of the principals. I found that, why can't we do more of that? Mixing chamber music, like highlight members of the orchestra as well as the orchestral music. Why can't I see a major conductor just conduct 12 people? And it was really exciting. And it also introduced a lot of new people to the orchestra, people that found these concerts super interesting. And it's hard work. It's hard work to do this. The other thing about all of this flying around and not availing ourselves of the local heroes too is, I think a lot about the fact that this coming generation coming up, that are teenagers, or 20-something-year-old, even children, are not bidding adieu to the old world the way we are. They have started their lives now, so there's less of a sense of loss in that way. And they are saying things like they're less likely to eat meat. They're much more vegan and vegetarian than the older generations are. Some of them are saying, I would be okay with not having children. I think that would be good for the planet right now. I mean, I can see them boycotting events that were carbon heavy. I can see the younger generation saying, we're not going to go to this wonderful concert that you flew in an orchestra from Europe. This is bad for my future. And no amount of enlightenment that I gain from listening to the artistry of these musicians is going to take away what I lose in my future. And they will be able to do that. And we have to just face what is coming. And if we get ahead of it, we're going to be more in control of the decisions that are made. and to get with the times. This is where we are right now. I actually think the rewards are immense. They're immense if we move this way.
I couldn't agree with you more. I'm curious though, and in talking with you in the past, I think I have some of the reasons why. Tell us about just how you like you said, you're a product of both incredible advantage and disadvantage. And one of the advantages, of course, is you grew up in an incredible environment of the Bay Area. You went to wonderful schools, and you started on this it's somewhat traditional path of being commissioned, meeting the right folks, being commissioned by the right orchestras and right ensembles, and yet you still have through what I'm guessing are personal experiences with what has happened to you directly, where you have become such a informed citizen um, beyond music. And it's now that experience that those experiences that you have had, and the decisions that you have made, personal decisions you've shared you've been so open in a way of sharing with those personal experiences that now informs you, informs the music you make, informs the way you teach, informs the path that you want to take. And I'm curious, what were some of those initial experiences that led you down this path?
I had no choice because I felt like such an odd duck out of the water from the very beginning. So
Mm-hmm.
I just was very behind when I started off at the conservatory. I could barely read or write music, to be honest, because my ear was so good that when my piano teacher played something, I would pick it up really quick. And I would use the notes on a page as kind of a guide, but I couldn't really sit down and read them. I didn't really understand how rhythmic notation worked. So, um, and then I'm a product of a civic initiative. My dad was a Peace Corps volunteer. I wouldn't be here, but he had this feeling of needing to go out into the world as a World War II baby, as one of the first volunteers in President Kennedy's new program to send young Americans abroad to what we were calling the Third World. My dad did that, and I'm here because he brought home a Peruvian wife. And so I think there's always been this sensibility of having to participate in some way and comment. And my dad's a Mark Twain scholar, and Mark Twain's our first great American writer who's truly modern. You read his things now, he could be talking about exactly what is happening today. And there was always the specter of Mark Twain as a commentator, as looking at fellow man and the politics of the time. So when I got to the conservatory environment, I remained that person, even if I didn't bring that into the practice room or talk about it with teachers. And while in Houston, I was an ESL tutor for the Mexican maids that I was confused with being. And I volunteer taught piano lessons for disadvantaged, mostly children of color, African American and Latino. I mean, I was volunteering time. It was something that just had to do. I volunteered at a men's prison in Adrian, Michigan, that were mostly Latino inmates while I was in grad school. And these were things that were just part of me.
Yeah.
But I also think that we need to offer these, like deliberately offer these routes to
Yeah.
students. Because the few times I did talk about it with my peers, I found reception. People were curious. I mean, we were so young and idealistic, and part of us is wondering, is this all there is?
No.
Can I do more? Or I want to do more. I don't want to feel like all of us wondered a little bit, about is this the most impact I can have, or are all my audiences just going to be moneyed people that can afford the tickets? Is this really the route to greatness and impact? Um, and I think with the advent of the internet and everything going on in the last 10, 15, 20 years, these young people think about these things more now. So um, I almost took a job right away. I was offered a job my last year in doctoral studies. I went on the job market looking for a kind of a typical first job for a composer, and it was a small liberal arts school. I remember looking at that email, and saying, you're being offered this job, it pays this amount of money. And it was kind of a classic offer. And part of and this little voice inside me said, don't do it. Don't do it. You've been a student since you were 5 years old. Here you are, almost 29, almost a quarter of a century. You've been living in academia of one sort or another, whether it's public school or whatever. And so I said no with not much of a plan, but I had already gone to Latin America a couple times.
Yeah.
Just began to taste something different. So I don't know how to answer your question, except I've always felt atypical, being brown, being a woman composer, being partially deaf, volunteering on the side, not reading and writing music very well, and practicing, staying up late, going EGBDF and practicing rhythms in secret and shame so that nobody would see. I've always felt.
I suppose I asked that question only in that for folks that may not have the same experiences as you, you are offering that vista through your academy. The experiences you've had, you're creating that safe space that was given to you. You're creating this ability to look beyond what is truly such a small square that a typical conservatory training is giving our students. So I suppose the reason I asked is that, your experience is one thing, but it is something that is so crucial, I think, that could be used as part of a curricula beyond, that individual experience.
I think so. I mean, I imagine, gosh, the steps that could be taken by conservatories, and could they be scholarships that were based off of community, what we might call community volunteer work, outreach work, and could this be done in a way that wasn't disdainful, where everybody truly supported it and it was like prestigious. It was prestigious to do that and not just a competition. If there could be a value shift in which we're training musicians for the world, we're not training musicians for the music industry first. We're training them for the world. We want them to have good jobs, to not be stressed out, to get divorced because there's so much stress in their life. I mean, to actually be art citizens, local heroes. What would that look like? And so I talk about that in my house, and I say, is there a way for you to step back from your training and to look at that as 10% of what you need? Now, where are you going to get the other 90%? I'm going to say, you actually already have 25% in you. I mean, you played in a punk band, and you must know worlds that I don't, and you grew up in the country. What about like doing some volunteer work at these impoverished schools? And then I try to back it up. Like, I will bring my composers when they come here and we do our work. I would take them into this high school where I volunteer in this town. And the volunteer work this year has been difficult because of the pandemic, but it's a small rural school with very modest resources. I'm amazed they have a small music class, and we'll go visit that music class and just try to give these mostly Latino sons and daughters of the local vineyard and farm workers around here a sense of possibilities, a sense of diverse voices, something very different. So we've because my composers are so diverse and they have skill sets that I don't have, and they have perspective that I don't have, that possibility of owning your vocation more than you thought you could naturally presents itself. And then we try to get them professional work along their personalities, along their skill sets, along their perspectives, because it's one thing to come out inspired. It's another thing to try and actually find, it's another thing to actually try and find paying work that supports their perspective that is, quote, atypical from a certain vantage point. Now, some of the composers I bring in here, I have to remember to talk to them too, because they didn't train in a conservatory, the Western Conservatory. So the first year composers that I had were mostly people that were very close to my kind of education, were not as diverse. And I had to realize that just because I'm Latina doesn't mean that I can instantly command into existence a diverse group of people. Because most of the people I went to school with were not that diverse. And the composers I was working with in these festivals were marginally more diverse, but I had to put in some real recruitment effort to find the others.
Mm.
And by doing that each year, it's just been blowing up. And being open to punk, being open to hip hop, being open to Carnatic, Indian traditions, among others that are coming in, and it's been transformative for me to do that. So I try and show these composers how to do that too, and for them to see somebody like me that's giving back also. So I have not paid myself for this work yet. It has consumed my life. It's my professorship. It's why I've turned down offers from really great music schools and conservatories, is to stick with this and to do this. And that's the kind of commitment I think something like this right now takes anyway. And I hope that changes. It needs to change at some point. I got to get paid $1. But right now I'm focused on my staff, my musicians, my composers, and learning from them, that we can try and pose other models. This doesn't have to be the only one. I think there's so many composers out there that could open up their own creative academies out of their house. And there are performers that could just do something. And there's so much that could be done. We don't have to think the music industry as it exists right now is the only way,
Well, just like that, our hour is up. Thank you for being such an inspiration to me and to so many others, and to walking the walk, and to show what it's like to be a citizen, to be engaged. I think that, and thank you for sharing that harrowing story of being accosted. So many people, and certainly a very natural response would have been to close up and to forget about it and put it aside, and hopefully.
Hell to the no. Hell to the no.
You respond.
Ultimately, Donato, I'm filled with hope. I'm filled with optimism. I feel like we are going to go green. We are going to welcome diverse voices, that it will take another generation at least before we see the next step, next level of progress. But I wouldn't change, the direction that I feel like I need to move in. And it's because of these wonderful people that the Academy has brought into my life. So I'm very optimistic.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And we'll see who the next guest is. But I want to ruminate on what we talked about for a few weeks. Thank you, Gabby.
Thank you.